Resurrection as defined by Webster's dictionary, to raise from the dead, the rising of all human dead before the final judgment. This is the general understanding and idea that most people have about the resurrection, the literal physical raising of our dead physical bodies at the coming of Jesus in judgment. The Bible speaks of the resurrection often. It speaks of it in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. In the KJV, it is mentioned 41 times in the New Testament, and in the Old Testament, it is mentioned often, but not by the specific word resurrection. Phrases like, "Ye shall stand in the end," "cause you to come up out of your graves," and "those that sleep shall awake" are used throughout the Old Testament and literally mean resurrection. Resurrection is a major Bible topic and concern for any Bible student. Considering the frequency with which this word is used and the emphasis placed upon it, it is vital that we allow the Bible to define what is meant by resurrection. Adam and Eve, for instance, partook of the forbidden fruit, and in that day they did indeed die the death foretold by God. God did not lie. He did not change his mind. God made a promise and God kept his promise. The day they partook, they died. Please notice, they did not perish physically. They did not collapse onto the ground and their hearts did not stop beating. It was not a physical death, it was a spiritual death. They had died spiritually. Romans 6:23 says the wages of sin is death. Isaiah 59:1-2 says your sins separate you from God. This is the same type of death that Paul experienced in Romans 7:9. Well, the commandment came, sin revived, and I died. Paul said he died. Yet he was still there writing to the church in Rome. Yes, you are spiritually dead when you sin. Your sins separate you from God. In John 5:25, John told them, "The hour is coming, and now is, when the dead shall hear the voice of the Son of God, and they that hear shall live." Yes, they could come back to life, which is resurrection now. In verse 26, he said, "As the Father has life in himself, so he hath given the Son of Man to have life in himself." What kind of life does the Father have in himself? Jesus answered that in John 4:24, when he said that God was a spirit. That was the life that was to be given. In verse 27, God had given Jesus the authority to execute judgment, and that is exactly what Jesus was doing at that time. He was calling them dead and telling them they could live. The hour was coming, but now is, he told them. They could at that time pass from death to life and not come into condemnation, judgment. We have access to life, resurrection, even now through baptism, Romans 6:3-6. If we have been resurrected, then we, like Lazarus who Jesus raised, need not worry about any future resurrection. We are alive with the Lord and we never have to die again. Jesus paid that price. Believest thou this? John 11:25. Biblical resurrection is not how Webster defines it. It is not how the average person generally understands it. Biblical resurrection is how the Bible describes it. Physical death is not the Christian's enemy. It is a natural process that all must experience. 1 Kings 2:2. Spiritual death, on the other hand, is the enemy. Paul would declare this truth in Philippians chapter 1, verse 21. "For to me to live is Christ, and to die is gain." Paul was saying that when he died physically, he could go to be with the Lord. How could physical death be the Christian's enemy? Jesus did not come to resurrect us from physical death. He came to resurrect us from spiritual death, to raise us up to be alive with him spiritually.